You see, I'm in a little Christian discussion group in Ipoh. I don't know when I'll be kicked out, okay? Because from their point of view, all the others are all, how should I put it, Christians in a kind of evangelical sense. I'm the only Catholic there. Their kind of view of Christian is very much different from mine. Different from mine not only because I'm Catholic, but different from mine because I would consider myself to be a humanist, I would say above everything, if I may so confess. So they would always be, chapter and verse, the Bible this, the Bible that, right? Which clearly, to me, is not the right way. And you can see, it's not only Muslims who have this kind of problems, Christians also have this kind of problems, right? It's a very narrow kind of worldview, not helpful in my view. Secondly, I want to address the issues of, I was a little bit late, sorry, but I think what Dr. Farrow had been saying was the proposition for a secular state or a secular system of public discourse is that the commons must be free of normative values dictated by any particular quarter. That means it's a highway totally open and any car can move, not cars of a particular color or type. So the question now is, when you have a substantial Muslim or Islamic requirement in that system, if it ever gained power, would the way it administered the commons leave the commons change in some way, perhaps even, the word tainted may not be quite appropriate, but as in, if I lend you something and you change the color from blue to orange and so on, and then when you lose the next elections, when somebody else takes over, do we now have to undertake substantial renovation work again? So if the commons can be something that can be structurally neutral, then society can have, say, past takes power, runs the country with a greater tilt towards Islamic values. If it loses power, some other party comes in, would tilt the other side, but there will be very little permanent change to some of these things that we call the commons. I think that was what perhaps Dr. Farrow was trying to make the point. But Dr. Hashemi, I think your views was suggesting that, and I think Dr. Zoto, if we have a large Aka Umbi, the grassroots say in past, how do you get them across this conceptual line into the modernity that I talk about? And no amount of intellectualism is going to work. It's intelligence, political activism that actually has traction on the ground. And that requires that you talk to them in the language that has empathy for them. I agree with that order completely. Again, here we also need the counterpoint to this is, for how long should we prolong this state of relative ignorance about the practical end result and the practical tests of achievements that we talk about, as in socio-economic development, graphs of science and technology, and so on. Because if you keep talking about this thing to reassure and not willing to pull them over this side, then this thing can go on forever, and there'll be some other politicians who will milk this forever to make themselves relevant, because it's only this part of the discourse they can operate in, not this part, okay? So, clearly I think the answer lies somewhere, right? That you need both parts to pull them. But at the end of the day, there must be an objective test, and that we must go to the empirics. How does that society operate in terms of delivery of prosperity and happiness? I think even the West, if you could show a model of how you could take 300 million people or 500 million people across the line, and it works, they have to drop their pants, whatever they're using, and look. Even China, Singapore, right? They stop and they ask why. It's not perfect. But you see, again, with China, now the discourse, I think the world need to talk to China about is how to develop and respect human rights. You see, Malaysia dares to talk about Palestine, but Malaysia does not dare to talk about the Uyghurs, does not dare to talk about Xinjiang, out of our own national self-interest only. We dare to deal with Israel, but we don't dare to deal with China. Why is that so? If religion is the be-all and end-all. Religion clearly is not the be-all and end-all. There must be, human agendas involved, and that's the reality. Yeah, that's all I wanted to contribute.
Good point. Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with you. But the big question that you asked is how long do we sort of keep this sort of, debate going? It's a good question, and unfortunately I don't have an answer. I think, one thing that has to happen is that we need to be operating on many parallel tracks here. Yeah. There has to be an ongoing, I think, engagement with communities that are under the sway of non-democratic religious discourses. But at the same time, at the level of politics has to still be moving forward. So we have to be operating under different tracks, and I'm not saying that we should sort of simply be beholden to this constituency that is locked within a particular worldview and allow them to dictate how a country progresses or regresses. One question that I'm not sure of in the Malaysian context, and you sort of hinted at it in your comments, is, look, we need a basic foundation where everyone can agree with. So whatever political party comes in, they'll adopt their policies, but the core foundation of a framework for, you didn't say this, but democratic norms and values will still be there. So it doesn't matter what party comes into power, the basic, well, that's what a constitution is about. So I don't know what the Malaysian constitution is comprised of, and whether there is an attempt to change it, or whether that constitutional framework is still basically in place, or are political parties coming into office saying that we want to fundamentally change the Constitution in ways that would undermine that stability that you were talking about, that I think all societies fundamentally need. I mean, that's in many ways the task of, emerging democracies sort of at some point reach a point where they write a document that has broad support based on a broad consensus, and then that document stays there, so it doesn't matter what party comes in. Everyone has agreed to the basic document, and the country moves forward, and you have elections. I get a sense from what I know of Malaysia is that perhaps you haven't arrived at that point yet.
Perhaps I could, I should come in at this point.
Yeah.
Yes, we have not actually addressed that, Mr. Kong. I think we somehow, it wasn't part of our discourse this far, because it involved a more constitutional and perhaps as well legal domains there, and perhaps none of us are from that background. So we have deliberately, perhaps, or out of our own weaknesses, perhaps we have not touched on that. But I think Prof. Hashimi's comment, I think, would warrant me to at least, in my perspective, talk on this issue now. The so-called social contract that forms the foundation, of the social fabric of this plural society is almost there. I think those are what I would call as the building block of it. These are the pillars, so to say. And come what may, it should, to a large extent, cast in stone, more or less. No one coming in, would sort of deconstruct this, and dismantle this. I think in these are the foundation of the founding fathers that have put on this. I think that provides for a lot of consolation and assurance that whatever the dynamics of the political process, it would not. This has always been. If there is this word called grand norm, many legal people will understand the grand norm of the Constitution, which is almost like the DNA of the Constitution, the founding, foundation of the Constitution. And in somehow, our Constitution is unique in the sense that, it doesn't have that grand norm as such, where, it preambles itself by saying that this is a secular state or Islamic state or what have you. It doesn't have that. And to a large extent, this has opened up to a lot of acrimonious, unending debate. And this is why, it has exacerbated and aggravated this dialogue. And I think I would want to look at it positively as an optimist. I always see opportunity in problems and not problems in opportunity. So I think this is how we should move forward, to engage in a very engaging fashion by all political actors, players, as well, civil society organization, to not allow, any form of I wouldn't want to use the word, but for lack of word, extremes, be it whatever, secular or religious, and bigotry, both secular, racial, religious, and we should gravitate to really in the middle, where it will really provide for intense contestation, truly functional and vibrant democracy, and a democratic, strong institutions of all the check and balance by way of legislative, by way of whatever, So I think it is here that personally I feel that Malaysia is unique. It's and it's not like Turkey, how Erdogan faced in Turkey, or for that matter Morsi's faced in Egypt. But with us, I think that we should look at it this way, and no one should subvert this process. No one should in their own, partisan and selfish ways, narrow way, bigoted perhaps sometime, perverted sometime, sabotage and subvert this process. And for as long as we are able to engage as responsible, discerning, and wise citizens, I think it is positive for us. I know your anxiety, much as I also, sometimes have that. But this is the challenge of a country, not like in the United States. You have centuries of traditions. Ours is only half a century. So, but it provides that opportunity. And as I've said yesterday, Islamists, I say it again, truly believe that democracy is about the most effective means of getting to realize even Islamic visions. You can quote me on this one, because I really believe that the commandments of ashura in the Quran, or consultation, as the rule of governance, is best expressed through democracy. And this is, I have no qualms to say it in very equivocal or in very uncertain term. So back to your the crux of what you were saying earlier. Yes, it's happened that our good lawyer is now with us. Andrew, you can continue this you must, and this is why we don't have to agree, to look like, no, we can agree to disagree and use that as a very positive platform for advancing, the betterment of our society. I think one comment that somehow escaped me earlier, your fear of, and as well Dr. Farouk, I don't think it's, let me just put it correctly. It's not so much that religious debate would swing it to, I don't think that is the issue. The issue to me, honestly, is whether, through your advocacy and finally saying it through, that it will deliver the outcomes in terms of a socially just development, in terms of justice, in terms be favorable to all and serving the interests of the majority of the people. That is the question. That is not being, bigot. That is really, what we and how we should discuss this. And I would really want to deliver that. I thought I've missed that point, and thank you for.
Exactly how I think.
Yeah.
On your point about the social contract, as you're saying that would guide us, and that's we have much that you think we have agreed on. But personally, I think the very use of this term social contract triggers anxiety amongst non-Malays and non-Muslims, because it has been more recently popularized by the likes of Perkasa and Ismail. What do you mean by social contract?
The right-wing group?
Yeah, the right wing.
So they're calling for a new social contract?
No. They said that the social contract was like
they
this.
Give a theme
but for non-Muslims
Yeah.
and non-Malays, they take a more legalistic, technical view of what social contract means, and to them it's the Constitution. There's no unwritten agreement that would override the Constitution. Whereas the right-wingers are basically like tweaking at the edges of the Constitution, kicking at the legs a bit.
And now the minister.
Huh?
And now the minister.
Yeah, and so on.
The latest, he gave the 3R,
But all this, I think, can be overcome if you have a moderate Malay-Muslim leadership that can bridge the past and the future. And when I say in the future, take it to the very long run. You could one day have a Chinese prime minister who's not a Muslim. It's not going to be in my lifetime. But before we get there, we will continue to need Malay-Muslim leadership. And that's not something we want to broadcast.
There will be headline tomorrow in the newspaper for this discourse. Tell you. I know.
No, that's not something we want to
I know,
broadcast.
we are all able to accept that.
But that is actually the practical outcome amongst a range of possibilities which are more theoretical in nature. And a party like PAS, I say, has a huge contribution to make if they can play that role. And they can only play that role if they lead from the mainstream. Saying a lot of things that you said to carry the grassroots, akar umbi across the line, without causing anxiety amongst non-Muslims, and ultimately, together with the non-Muslims, as a united Malaysian people, being able to deliver the practical outcomes. As soon as you can deliver that practical outcomes and hold it for 2 terms, then the framework of the discourse would have moved, and many more things would have become possible. I think that's about where it is.
I agree on that.
The difficult task of bridge building, parties that can have one foot in one camp and another foot in the other and can sort of provide that type of leadership is incredibly valuable in terms of, I think where Malaysia is today and where other Muslim societies are today.
I mean, I say that not because, I want to make myself as a non-Malay, non-Muslim subservient to the Muslim.
No, I understand,
That is simply the practical fact of the matter. I mean, the country cannot progress until the Malays and the Muslims can cross this line. And that's exactly what we should wish for.
I call it the tipping point.
Okay, I don't know whether I'm off track on this in my own thinking. Okay, this intellectual discourse in this kind of round table is all well and good at the higher level. Even yesterday's grouping was more at the higher level. As what Kong says is we need to get it down to the ground. Dr. yourself has said take it to the ground. In my opinion, whether it's religious or political, civil society should reign supreme. And social justice should be the objective of the whole society. Now, I respect Idris Jalla for his GTPs and ETPs, but I had made comments specifically that it doesn't talk of equitable distribution. Now, as far as I see, the so-called social contract from the Constitution has actually been abused by the government with its 2/3 majority in changing the Constitution in many ways. And I think Dr. Shime may not be thoroughly aware of this, but probably needs to be briefed on what has happened. What I see is selective enforcement, selective prosecution, selective promotion, and everything selective. And I've often said this is political cronyism and self-interest in society. I mentioned yesterday, which I said before, why do we say that we have a 1.7% poverty rate and 4.8 million households, that means about 20 million population, which is 2/3 of the country's population, needing BRIM support to make ends meet? It is very, very bad.
That was in 2013, by the way. 2014, it is 7.9. Not head of household though. Plus all, the recipients.
Households.
No, I'm talking about the recipients, the entire recipients. Yeah.
But the claim was 4.8 million households.
That's head of household, yeah.
Now, things that people talk about, okay, these people are not affected by increases in price, is a load of bullshit. Because if somebody raises a price, whether it's a rich guy or a poor guy, he still needs to eat his nasi lemak or basic food, but those prices have gone up. And their incomes have not gone up that way. So it's social injustice. I have sort of personal battles on other social injustice in terms of renewable energy, but issue is for the public, general public. From my own experience, from my primary school days, there were a lot of missionary schools, and I believe it was Najimuddin himself, Mega Najimuddin, who mentioned that he studied in a Christian school, learned the Bible, but it has not changed his religion. And he's still applying the principles of both religions. And I believe, as I said yesterday, the basic way of life that all religions promote and support is, I think, generally consistent, whether it's Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, because we want society to be equitable, have decent life, and they should not have to be forced into a situation where they have to commit crimes to survive. And this is where I would say it's not so much the democracy part of it, but socialist policies that should give this equality. I've heard comments that countries which have implemented hudud have all been failed states. Well, we don't know about Brunei, which is something a bit different, which is very recent. But if that is the case, why don't we take on the examples of those supposed to be the most Islamicist states, which do not have religion as a basic governing principle, but have social justice? The Scandinavian countries, New Zealand, and so on. In Malaysia, I think over the years, Islam in particular, particularly because of the extremists and some of the religious clerics or so-called religious experts, have tended to bring Islam into what I believe among the major society is in a bad light, seeing it in a bad light. And political decisions are in fact exasperating that. For example, when there are, I think there was some demonstration getting into an assembly hall, and because it was basically UMNO supporters, there was no action against them. And if I'm not mistaken, the interfaith religious group that wanted to discuss and try to resolve these interfaith issues was basically stopped from doing it because they said the Muslim groups cannot participate in the non-Muslim. So the so-called interfaith group is only for the non-Muslim interfaith groups. I'm not sure whether this is exactly true, but this is the perception that I have built in my mind. Maybe wrong, but it's something that I'm an engineer, not a lawyer, so I cannot say from the legal part of it. Society does not care about what religion a person is. If the person doesn't have the basic amenities to be able to live, eat enough food, have a roof over his head, that person needs help. And I think anybody should be willing to help on that. I do not agree with the Selangor state government giving free water, which is, the money would be better spent giving more food to the food kitchens, soup kitchens and others to help the poor. I noticed, and I've been in Kedah in my service, where a lot of the farmers, fishermen, were living very, very subsistence living. I know that our government in the past, through oil palm plantations, have improved the lifestyles of a large proportion of the population. But today, the thing has been reversed. It's again the same government. Alliance with the government that tried to equalize incomes, and the Barisan is making the gap even wider. I hope, and I had great expectations of PAS because of the way of dealing in Kelantan when I was actually serving in Kedah, that could be the issue to go on. But unfortunately, the question of Islam and religion has overridden social needs. Doctor, you have mentioned yourself, I do not particularly believe in religious politicism, but I do believe in socialism, which should be for all the population and an equalization of incomes and lifestyles. Thank you.
I just wanted to add a bit to what my colleague just said, and it's visible, Dr. Zul, that you took into consideration what I think in May Dr. Anas Al-Tikriti told you about the need to rebrand when we were discussing hudud, and he told you that PAS needs just to present it from the other angle, not Islamic, not hudud, but something what will benefit everybody. But you should understand that for non-Muslims, it's very difficult to understand that you need to discuss the common good of something when it's labeled Islamic. For them, it's Islamic, full stop. They wouldn't like to discuss it. So and probably in their minds, PAS didn't prove that Islamic really means equality for everybody, justice, and
how about Islamic banking
benefit.
and finance? Islamic?
Very contentious, very contentious.
No, I don't think that's true. When majority of them are even people of the faith subscribing to, it's not about Islamic or not, whether it delivers the
benefit.
The benefit. If you are just like how we have said that this S word is a dirty word.
Right.
And the I word is as well a dirty word to some
people.
Yeah, you just shut down when you say Islamic, but you don't shut down an Islamic bank, or banking or sukuk or others. So finally, it's about hard work. The buying-in process. It's just unfortunate that we have got to use the word Islamic. I, for one, would as you said yesterday, use the word ethical and those are. I mean, not difficult for us to understand. But remember, in the political dynamics versus UMNO, we're always there to all of us. The minute you draw, you say that, we no longer, you're dead meat. You got to understand the political dynamics of it. I'm not saying that you don't understand it, but that's how the dynamics of Malaysian politics. Once upon a time, they want to illegalize us using the word Islam. They know that we have a lot of allegiance to this, but we are not taking, we're not taking that. We are using it because there is a lot of allegiance to it. We want to make sure that if ever we use it responsibly and make sure you deliver what you intend. I think that is the more pertinent issue. Sorry to interject you.
So probably Islamic banking could overcome this and go through some kind of
rebranding. That's the branding that you want. Anything
but
Islamic must be good.
It's a different thing.
If I can just add a little bit about Islamic banking. I was on banking line for many years. So when I was at a bank, they actually introduced Islamic banking, but it was not called Islamic banking. It was called interest-free banking.
Yeah.
Okay. And I asked the guys who actually came out with this interest-free banking products. And I said, "What do you call it interest-free banking?" Because they were actually promoting basically Islamic values and stuff. So I said, no, we have to call it interest-free banking. I said, but why? They said, no, because this is not actually Islamic banking. You cannot call it Islamic banking, but it's just without riba, that's all. So I said, okay, fine, that's a good idea. But one fine day, they changed all the branding to Islamic banking. I said, how come you change it to Islamic banking now? Oh, because the regulators just say you have to change it to Islamic. And that was exactly why.
Who said it? Who said the change?
The regulators said.
The regulator said.
Yeah.
Who's the regulator? From the government?
Yeah, the government. Yeah, they said we have to change to Islamic banking, and it was a political decision.
Yeah.
I would look at it that way. So, but if you look at how Islamic banking, whether it's the loans and the Raba loans and all that go around, if you talk to a non-Muslim, okay, and they say, hey, this is Islamic banking, a loan, whatever. the first thing they will do is it cheaper? That obviously, and I'm sure that's the same with Muslims or whatever, you know. But there is a certain number of Muslims, oh yeah, because I'm Muslim, so I will go for this kind of product. But not all of them.
Of course.
The majority of them actually goes for the value of that product.
Exactly.
And this is exactly what you're talking about. It's not a matter of Islamic car or Islamic this or Islamic that.
Islamic hotels.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the same as, you know, whether it's a Japanese product, American product, who cares? In that sense. In that sense, who cares? Because it is the value of what you're trying to promote. Okay? If it's an ethical product and things like that, and because we believe in ethics, then fine, we'll go for ethics. But the labeling is actually throwing a lot of people off. And it becomes even worse when it goes to politics. Because if you ask me about PAS, you know, my understanding of PAS and my little view of PAS, the way PAS has been promoting itself is basically from a very Islamic branding. I don't hear that much. Not to say I may not know everything, but I don't hear that much about PAS pushing for anti-corruption. I don't hear that.
Oh
Not
no.
strongly enough.
No, I think that is.
I don't hear. I don't hear.
Perhaps.
Okay, I don't. I'm not
Your-
sure what's
it was
the
a word
feeling.
that you use, selective hearing.
Well,
No, sorry, I'm just playing.
That's the feeling I have. That's the feeling I have. I don't hear that.
I was glad yesterday that the media pick up on my input.
Yeah, they did.
On going from the prohibition, you know, halal, haram, and going for, you know, the intent of it. I think these are, you got to keep saying it to the media, and the media must keep picking it up. You know, my challenge in the parliament, I brought up a few issues about corruptions, and especially on the issue of KTM, the KTM, the purchase of it from China, where we lost about 500 million, half a billion ringgit. You know, I mean, when I was in there, we debate it, you know, regardless, you know. So I don't think it was quite right to say that we avoid this corruption. No, this has been one of our critique on UMNO. One of our critique of UMNO is that on governance. You know, we used to be, we hit them at hudud, but I think we have changed that for quite some time now. It's the corruptions and
but my view, okay, is that unfortunately this so-called Islamic agenda has been brought to the fore again when this whole hudud issue came up. It was very quiet for a while, which was very good, and that I think it was reflected by the success of Pakatan Rakyat with PAS and all that. Suddenly when the hudud things came and then it literally went back few years, and you know that's the issue. So I feel that was the reason why I asked you the question yesterday. I mean, it's good to have all this intellectual discussion, which you have to have some sort of foundation and a direction. But at the ground level, because I have a lot of expectation from PAS, because I think PAS plays a very important role in the whole politics of Malaysia, I would say. But if PAS is actually playing that position where it becomes a very Islamic label too much, you know, then this idea about you know, going for civic values and all that, you know, it just gets lost somewhere. So that's what
just unfortunate that it's like mutually exclusive. It's just unfortunate that I'm saying that you know, somehow it's seen as mutually exclusive. You want Islam, you cannot have. You know, it's not like that. Actually, it should be a continuum. You know, Islam means all the good branding. You know, justice, equitable. You know, success, excellence.
Totally
and then that is how it should be.
But the challenge. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. But my question was, for PAS, okay, from your perspective, I'm sure you've actually had that vision about as to where does PAS go from now, from where it is now, from the kind of branding, the perception there, do you need to see that PAS must cross over, you know, for us who are the Muslim and even the non-Muslim to say, hey, I think this is the new PAS. You know, this is someone where we can support or something like that. You know,
they have said that. They have said that, but now they have said no. PAS have retrogressed now.
Can I just add a little bit on this? I think you made quite right comments that PAS has not been vocal enough on some aspects. One of the issues is Malaysia was very late in condemning the Islamic State atrocities, and I think, as far as I remember, it was only after Indonesia condemned them that Malaysia followed.
Yeah.
Now, PAS, which has been promoting social justice, I think could have come out and won a lot of hearts in Malaysia from all the society if I come and said straight away that this kind of atrocities are not in line with our religion and should be agitation.
This is another selective listening as well. We were the first, and we sack our members to who have any dealing with ISIL or IS. But you don't seem to.
But it was not sufficiently publicized.
Whose media is it? Tell me.
Agreed.
Who owns this mainstream media?
But did you issue
We were the first.
Did you issue a press
long
release?
before. Yes, a lot earlier than.
There was, but when they supported the martyr over there, that became very huge.
Who they? 1%.
Yeah, but
all this overzealousness by one, somebody from, really destroy all our good,
Well,
somehow or other, you can't blame.
Yeah, that is nature of a broad,
I think it has to go down to the population as a whole and all the communities, because the polarization that has been going on over the last 2-3 decades has actually put Malaysia in a very bad situation compared to the situation we were in 50-60 years ago.
yeah.
True,
And
very
this
true.
This is a very sad thing, because a lot of people are moving out and the country is losing a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I know a lot of my friends,
Yes, brain drain.
brain drain, and significant portion of them are Malay Muslims.
Can I make one point here? 50, 60 years ago, in charting the way forward, I think we need to give recognition to the fact that 50 or 60 years ago, we did have good
Governance.
inter-race relationships. But we should not overplay that as a success, A lot of that was really English-speaking Malaysians of different races being able to sit together and drink beer and play gin rummy, right? And then
That
go
was
to
the
mosque
reason.
later on in the afternoon
Right.
and come back, and then tonight we'll go somewhere nice.
Right.
It was that kind of environment. But the sum total of those numbers of people were probably no more than 200,000 in the country. Today, we have to have an interaction across 20 million. It's a different ball game.
28 million.
I think the comparison needs to be taken with some caution. So today, the most important need is to how, and I would place responsibility on the non-Muslims too. How do we behave, together, in a way that allow us to walk towards modernity together. Some of us are more ahead, and I think on objective materialistic criteria, the non-Muslims are a bit ahead. Okay, so you can go very far ahead and leave them very far behind. Then the structure will be unstable. You know that. You can get some short-term gains for a long-term problem, or you're prepared to trade off something so that you can have a more permanent structural stability, right? But the Muslims themselves need to know that the world can't wait for them forever. They need to walk much faster, right? I think, and this is where, a party like PAS needs to do a lot more work, I think, with the Aka Umbi. See, like the fact that, he couldn't get the message that you condemn ISIS means that there must have been some calculus going on, how loud should that message be? If it's, if you had been able to just send a message out loud and clear, he would have heard it.
I think, with all due respect, and I'm not trying to apologize for this, the last few months, perhaps, whatever that come out of us has always been the not so good. Yes. The president mentioned that in the Muktamar, in his part of his speech, and never get highlighted. In fact, we mentioned that a lot earlier than even the prime minister, never get highlighted, because everybody was looking at us from Hudud, and not just Hudud. It wasn't even Hudud. It was about the crisis in Selangor. It really, bring us down.
Here's a suggestion I'd like to offer to everyone here that comes from a recent political experience in Turkey that helped decrease political polarization. When Turkey was going through its democratic journey, there was a lot of political polarization, largely around a secular sort of Islamic sort of divide. And one of the leading Turkish groups thought that one way of dealing with this divide is to organize an annual sort of roundtable conversation that would be broadcast to anyone who wanted to listen. And you would invite people from different political constituencies who normally would not come together. And you would discuss one particular issue that was on the national agenda. So let's say in the case of Turkey, one time it was the Kurdish issue. What do you do about Kurdish minority rights? One was the hijab issue. And over the course of these sort of meetings, what would happen, they would happen every year. They would bring people from different political constituencies and intellectuals who were willing to have a conversation. They would have a public debate, and then they would issue a joint statement that would try to narrow the gap and say, we agree on these broad principles. And, you know, as someone who studied sort of the Turkish experience, those national conversations among people who normally would not speak to one another, they had their own constituencies, they were always arguing in the media, helped, you know, generate a consensus. So I want to sort of suggest that perhaps, I don't know, maybe PAS, you get credit for doing this if it's successful, would try and organize these types of meetings on a national level, focusing on one particular topic, allowing people who cared to just listen in on it. There would be a Q&A session, and you know, you would then try and issue a joint memorandum or statement. Pick one topic, and it helps. That process might help in one very small way to decrease the polarization. I don't know. Maybe the Islamic Renaissance Front might want to take the lead.
Yeah, why not?
I mean, there's risks to it because you're going to get attacked. But if you can just get people who at least are willing to, agree to come to a table, you'll have different points of view. But then I think that experience, I know in the Turkish case, it helped push things forward. Now, Turkey right now is, there's been a lot of backsliding under Erdogan recently over democracy, but, that's a separate issue from where Turkey was, let's say, 25 years ago to where it is today. I think it's made significant gains, and one of the gains, I think, is directly attributable to these, what were called the Abant sort of meetings and the declarations that were put together, and I think it helped decrease polarization. It might work in the case of Malaysia, and so it's worth pursuing. If you wanted more details, I can tell you how it worked in the Turkish case, but I think something like that might perhaps be a contribution.
Hi, I would like to make a remark back to the issue of intellectualism. I know, Dr. Zhou, you might be very interested to have a conversation with me on this matter, but I want to highlight the point of the issue of intellectualism in relation to democratization and in relation to Islam. And here at the back we have a banner. There's the banner of Islamic Renaissance Front, say, for the people who think. I think in Islam and in Western civilizations where democratization took place, the understanding of what is a human being, and humanity is very important, is underlying all these social processes. So democratization is not just a social process, happen at a large level, also related to underlying belief and assumptions about what is to be a human. And Islam means submission to God. Submission to God to be what? How to be a Muslim when I believe that there is a God that I should submit to. So in Islam, what is a human actually is a huge knowledge, and a lot of Muslims have been struggling since the 7th century until today to think what is to be a human who submit to God, what is to be a Muslim, how to be a Muslim in the world. For me, this jihad is much more important than what is being misunderstood as jihad as fighting others. Jihad is fighting within ourselves how I can live up to the expectations and the standards and the values that God has given us. So here, within this concept about humanity, and for people who think, this is very important. So the history of Islam in Malaysia has largely been neglected. So the history of Islam started in the 7th century to so many parts of the world and so many centuries. Each Muslim Islamic empire, each Muslim communities have gone through so much of struggle and so much of knowledge generated from it and so much of manuscripts, so much of literatures produced, so many scholars live their life for Islam. But are we aware of them? That is what is very important. So I go back to the issue about intellectualism is highly valued in Islam if you look at the historical madrasa. And look at now how madrasa is being organized in this country, in Malaysia and in Southeast Asia. Given that we also have a history that Islam was brought to us only in the 10th century through a particular channel. And a lot of Sufis who brought Islam to Southeast Asia are now being seen as superstitious and not being valued about mysticism in Islam. I mean, even the root of Islam in Southeast Asia has not been valued by Muslims in Southeast Asia. So that's one thing. The other thing is about democratization. Go back to Dr. Hashimi had pointed out. In Western civilizations and democratization, the middle class is very important. And when we talk about the middle class, one of the characteristics is not just the right to own property, but also the right to education, which is the first book that has been published and been printed and been disseminated to the world. And what genre of literature, newspaper, first printed and distributed to the world. So freedom to education, freedom to literacy, freedom to ideas, freedom to education is so important. But that middle class need to be a very educated, cultured, and have the space to exercise the agency to think. So that's why I kind of am comfortable to be, keep on thinking that, can you give us a solution? Can you give us a model? You give me a good model, then I will follow you. I think we are not looking for, an Islamic party or whoever to give us a model. I think we are just looking for a space that we can think. What is Islam? How to be a Muslim? I think that is important. So with that, in Malaysia currently, many books who contain progressive ideas are being banned in the country. Spaces like this that we can openly debate and talk about what is Islam are not being given. A lot of time when the term Islamic being deployed, being used, is used as an identity marker. Such as I think my colleague Julia asked a very important questions about Islamic banking. What is Islamic banking? We have to go back to the theological understanding of economy and social justice to understand why we pay zakat, if we want to have Islamic banking, what is considered ethical? What is considered Islamic? With that, thank you.
Very good input.
Andrew.
Thanks, Farouk. Andrew Koo. A couple of things. First of all, apologies that I didn't get to attend the afternoon session yesterday and earlier this morning because of church commitments. So I apologize if what I'm going to ask or what I'm going to raise has already been spoken about. But at least from what I've heard, I haven't heard anyone in the context of democracy talk about the issue of reciprocity, which is the idea that, we all go into a system of democracy, but the moment we get in and we become the government of the day, we change the rules, so that we then make it harder or more difficult for somebody else to come back and to change things. So it's almost as though the popular perception is, given what we've seen in some Middle Eastern states where elections, free and fair elections have taken place, and then in the end result is you bring in a seemingly Islamist party into government, and that party then changes the rules, changes even the constitution to make it more difficult to outlaw certain things. And so democracy is seen as a means to an end to this ultimate goal of actually changing the idea of democracy into a more, I think, religiously fundamentalist structure. I think that really is a concern that I would say people do tend to still see as a problem, and it'd be interesting to have Dr. Nadia Hashmi maybe respond to that to a certain extent. Dr. Zul, you talked about Ashura, you talked about discussions and things like that, and your suggestion, Dr. Hashimi, of having this grand sort of meeting. Firstly, in Malaysia, I think in this environment that would never happen. Simply
Why not?
I'm going to tell you. Simply because the government of the day will not want to give free airtime, space, and publicity to the opposition. They may be prepared to have a quiet gathering of the great and the good of this nation to talk privately about problems that are being faced by the government, but to actually put it out as wide live telecast for everybody to see will give to groups that the government does not want to give the oxygen of publicity, free time, and they would never ever do that. So one of the reasons why they don't publicize any debates during elections, because they don't want to give the impression that the opposition is a valid or legitimate alternative to government, and so that's really why. So even in Malaysia, we've not really embraced this idea of a free and fair, level playing field of democracy, let alone the problems about electoral rigging. I mean, that's a whole different problem in itself. But even if you say we believe in a fair and just and democratic society, well, it's fair and just only for those who are, within the group that supports government. It's never free, fair, and just. And even when it comes to Ashura, I mean, you have situations where a mufti of a state is prohibited from speaking in another state because he doesn't have the credentials from that state, and because in Malaysia religion is a state matter, so you've somehow got to reobtain credentials or re-credentialize yourself in different states. And secondly, I'm not going to let you speak because your Islamic PhD was in a different topic and therefore you are not. So the idea is always to talk about what disqualifies you rather than what qualifies you. So it's always about how to exclude someone rather than how to include. So I mean, it was very interesting, and I've always instinctively thought that was true, but when you displayed just an extract from the Norwegian Constitution yesterday, I mean, I studied in England, so a bit aware. But this may be historical truths about how the nation state came to be in Norway, in the UK, in Sweden, all these sorts of things, where religion did play a role, right? And now it's there, and there is perhaps a token adherence to it, a nominalist approach to it, but it's never used, in my understanding, it's never ever used to exclude. Right? So although you have that historical legacy, baggage, whatever you want to call it, it's not used moving forward to say, aha, you are not one of us, therefore we exclude you. It's more very much an inclusive kind of thing. But in Malaysia, unfortunately, the rereading of the Constitution is leading us to an exclusion. So Norway says, the religion of the state is evangelical Lutheranism. Right? In England, it's, the Church of England, Anglicanism. But it doesn't say that if you're not Anglican, you're not Lutheran, somehow you're disqualified. But here, for 25 years or so, we had this phrase in Article 4 of the Constitution in Malaysia: Islam is the religion of the Federation. And we all lived, very happily, harmoniously, with nobody really giving too much thought to that. We thought that, okay, in formal occasions, occasions of state, there would be an Islamic prayer, and the oath of office of the head of state is couched in Islamic terms. We all said that's fine, that's okay. But post-Islamic revolution and all that, moving on from that, people then sort of said, well, this can't be just an innocent, thing that we just decorated our constitution with. Let's give meaning to it. So more and more things were done, and when things were questioned, why is it done this way? Why is it done in an Islamic way? The answer would be, well, Islam is the religion of the Federation. And therefore, flesh must be put on the bones of that statement, or credence, and more things must be given. So now for so many things, why is it done this way? Why is it done that way? Why can't we do this or that this way? Islam is the religion of the Federation. Yesterday, one of the things I did was, in scouting around for a meeting place, we went to the National Monument, which was built in 1966. There's a wonderful sculpture there by Felix de Welden, who did the Iwo Jima Memorial in Washington, D.C. And from the time of 1966 to I think the mid-1990s, our annual Warriors Day, a bit aggressive, but basically our Memorial Day, was held at the National Monument, at the foot of this sculpture military over the communist regime and things like that. But from the mid-1990s, we no longer have that ceremony there because somebody woke up and said, hey, hang on, this is haram to have a ceremony before sculpted images of men was un-Islamic, and therefore we cannot do it anymore. So we do it somewhere else now. You know, what changed? The change was that rereading, that re-understanding, that reinterpretation. And so what we see in Malaysia a lot now is all that, and it's done, unlike Norway and the UK, it's done to exclude rather than to include. And so the grand norms, again, Dr. Zul talked about the grand norms even are changing of constitution. So the constitution is being reinterpreted. Certain things are said, well, one of our former chief justices, who's now gone off in a very much pro-Islamic, very Sharia way, so he's seen to be a spokesman for that community, is now saying, well, was the author of a judgment at the federal court, which is our highest court, to say that the doctrine of separation of powers, while an acceptable political doctrine, has no basis in our federal constitution. And that's still, unfortunately, the binding definition of that. So we have people, even judges, who've basically discarded any idea that we are a secular state and we are rereading elements or stronger elements of a pro-Islam, very much a Islamic state, as it were, maybe capital I but small s, Islamic state that is now affecting us, and it affects the role, and it affects the participation of non-Muslims in this country. So even if you can think of it, even if a mufti or a PhD in Islam, a Muslim scholar, is told you cannot participate, or we don't recognize your contribution because you've got the wrong PhD or you've got the wrong this and that. Imagine what is being said to the non-Muslims. You can't even participate. So the idea of Ashura, yes, but only to Muslims and only to qualified Muslims. So we try to define who is eligible in the terms that is perhaps most favorable to us, and we exclude those who fall outside. Thank you.
Right. I would respond to this. It's good that Yuan and Andrew spoke. At least provides me with an opportunity to highlight a few things. Firstly, over those things that Julia mentioned about this Islamic thing, incidentally, I'm quite familiar with banking and finance. It's been my obsession after I left academia, and I've worked with a fund, asset management, Islamic base, and as well right now. There's a lot more to say about this, but not in this platform. The idea of is Sharia compliant, to me, if you want to go back to our discourse earlier, that will really serve the purpose of Islamic banking, which is the maqasid, the intention of Islamic banking and finance, actually is a far cry. I'm not quite sure how far, but we have not really come up to really fulfilling the spirit and purpose of Islamic banking and finance. It was just meant to make it like look compliant.
Cosmetic.
I wouldn't want to say it's cosmetic, but if you talk to real scholar, they are saying that it is not it should not just be Sharia compliant, it should Sharia based, because the spirit of Islamic banking is partnership, equitable distribution. So all this is not looked into. So at the end of the day, it's all about whether I'm going to be paying worse than the floating scheme, floating rates, in terms of loans and whatnot. So the murabaha is actually cost plus financing. It only, the akad or the contract, be made compliant to Sharia demands. Okay, let's forget about it. But I've debated this in the parliament. I said we have advanced Islamic banking and finance, but does Islamic banking and finance really serve the purpose of finally bringing equitable distribution of income and wealth to all? But that has been quite painful for them, until now. Still, I'm going to still pick it up on some other battle. Okay, my comment on Shura, Andrew. It's very unfortunate. When this word Shura, immediately you invoke Mufti. Shura, for past, immediately is Majlis Shura Ulama. This is entirely misplaced and misdirected, or Shura is about the entire thing of governance in Islam. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ are the two verses in the Quran. It talks about that the manner and mechanics of governing a country or a state is through consultation. It is not about putting the clerics to dictate. They have their role, much as others have their role. But we don't have that understanding. It's also skewed towards, as you said correctly, who are entitled to make fatwa and who will be around the table for making this fatwa. It has gone completely off. The real intention of Shura is that consultation process, which is not consultation actually, that debate, that dialogue, that kind of contestation, not consultation alone. That is the intense effort of all policy makers, and the Parliament is the epitome of Shura. Both the bicameral, Dewan Negara and Dewan Rakyat. We have also a bicameral system here. That is manifestation of Shura, which people do not even have any inkling that is what is alluded, or that is what is demanded. And Ibn Ashur made it very clear in his book when he was giving this Sharah to Shatibi's Maqal, said that the best embodiment of Shura as demanded by the Quran is the parliamentary system of choosing elected representatives to represent the voice of the people. We will never get that kind of understanding. Shura immediately is about Mufti making fatwa and then impose it, and we're still, of course, in our federation setup, the construct, one Mufti is in one state, is not binding of his fatwa on the others, and there's a lot of discrepancies and a lot of lacuna and a lot of vacuum and loopholes here and there, and all these need to be addressed. It's unfortunate I've got to say this, but I will make it very clear that this is a totally wrong understanding of Shura, and there need to be a revisit on this issue of Shura alone, because, as you correctly put it, it's meant to exclude and not to be an inclusive process of democratization, consultation, contestation, which is really, the positive way forward for any state to have the ideal state of a democracy. I mean, I'm so passionate about this. I don't want to take this platform to be the debate, but there's a lot that we need to revisit this very vital, important concept in the Quran. Sorry, I've got to quote this. It's Quran, it's Islamic, whatever. But what I'm saying is, if that provides for the betterment of society, be it if it's coming from Torah, Old Testament, New Testament, I'm more than willing to, make use of it so that we could better our country. I think that should be the attitude, but unfortunately it's not as as forthcoming for the time being. All right, I think those are 2 points that I would like to comment. There was something else that, okay, Islam, okay. I think that's about it.
A quick comment to Andrew. Andrew, I'm very sympathetic to everything that you had to say. You know, there's a lot that I want to respond to, but I'm somewhat very reluctant to do so because I'm an outsider coming to Malaysia for the first time. So I just have a broad understanding of what the challenges are. But just to pick up on one of the things that you said, yesterday when I showed the articles of the Norwegian Constitution, and with all these religious references, I was just trying to highlight the point that you can have, an established, full-functioning democracy that has these religious references, and they're really simply there as markers of sort of historical memory. They don't really, as you said, affect how justice is administered in society because there are other laws and mechanisms that, allow for everyone to have basically a fair shake. But, just to pick up on that point, there has been recently a rise in many of these Scandinavian countries, the rise of these anti-immigrant parties, anti-Islamic parties that are sort of trying to change and push things in a very negative direction. But one of the good things that exists, that prevents that from happening, hopefully over the long term, as the basic foundations of the political system, particularly an electoral system, are there, so that if some party comes and starts to rise, the hope is that in the context of an open public sphere and in an electoral process that's free and fair, those voices will eventually be marginalized. And I think that just highlights, the necessity of putting, a lot of energy and emphasis on making sure that the basic rules of the political game in any emerging democracy are fundamentally there. And that revolves around an electoral process that, really reflects the wishes of the citizenry of a society. And I realize here in Malaysia there are a lot of deep concerns about elections that are rigged, that are not free and fair, that can be manipulated. And I suspect that until that gets fixed, then a lot of these problems are going to still fester because existing political powers are going to be able to manipulate and advance their agendas, and then when it comes to an election and they have to be held accountable for their policies, you can't hold them accountable because they always figure out a way of getting around, and they'll just perpetuate their political rule. So it seems to me that one of the big challenges here in terms of prioritizing is just to make sure that that basic structure of democratic accountability that we have in terms of elections that are free and fair somehow can be achieved, because then if you can get that in place, then that's, a step forward in terms of dealing. So you can say whatever you want in the public sphere, and a lot of it may be deeply offensive, hopefully in the context of a free and fair election, and then at least a relatively open civil society and public debate. You'll be held accountable one day for what you say, and then that will allow things to, move forward. So, like I said, I'm sympathetic with a lot of that you said. One of the problems that I think Malaysia is facing here, and everyone sort of instinctively knows this, unfortunately, over the last 30, 40 years, there have been a lot of very deeply, ultra-conservative interpretations of Islam that have emerged from the Arab world and spread their way here and are really causing a lot of problems. This is not something that was hinted at before that we really had 50, 60 years ago. And so this is affecting, Muslim communities all over the world. And the challenge, of dealing with those types of interpretations is you need alternative interpretations that can push back at those people who are claiming to speak in the name of religious authenticity. But you also need sort of, solid democratic minimum sort of standards of accountability rooted in free and fair elections that can, vote that political constituency, at least hold them accountable if they continue to advocate those ideas. And so, as I said, I'm an outsider. Malaysians know better what the challenges are, but that strikes me from someone who's, just observing things from a distance. Those are some of the things that strike me as being areas of yeah.
I know this is your first visit.
Yeah.
Have you been shown or have you seen some of the speeches by our minister? I'm just picking one, just as an example from May of this year, where he talked about human rightism, humanism and secularism as a new religion threatening Islam in Malaysia.
I haven't heard that, but this is not new to discourse among Muslim communities. They use those things as I mean, they're basically trying to manipulate people's public. Manipulated people's emotions and trying to manipulate public sentiment. So I've heard that discourse before, not that particular. And so the challenge is, how do you respond to that type of discourse? And I think it's the challenge it's a challenge of those people who can sort of say, look, that might be your view, but there's another reading of this particular interpretation of Islam and so you're entitled to your perspective, but it's not the only perspective. And so the question is really, how do you deal with those types of speeches? And I think you have to try and push back, and you have to try and provide responses. But of course, I realize it's an unfair battle, because the state has a lot of resources and a lot of sort of ability to enforce and push their agenda down people's throats, and it's not a level playing field. So there's a lot of ugly things being said. I think the challenge of ugly speech is you have to respond back with better speech, and that's a long-term project. It's not something you can flick on a light switch and it's all going to be fixed. So I'm not surprised to hear that, and that's the challenge of political actors, within Malaysia, to try and agree to a common agenda, sort of put aside differences for later. And focus on getting the playing field level, and then once you get there, then you can deal with more complex questions.
Well, in our perspective, it was in fact a challenge to pass.
Yeah.
It's just trying to outwit pass and unseat pass.
Yeah.
This is trying to prove of UMNO's Islamic credentials.
Yeah.
That and he's just not understanding what he's. Understanding it, what he's saying is actually going to boomerang back on him and UMNO. But we do not take up that challenge, because we
choose your battles.
We choose our battles, and it was clearly of course there was another thing about it was just not for PAS but as well for Andrew's kind of constituencies.
Yeah.
The more the human rights and.
Right.
Human rights is they see it as, and these are they are in fact representing the right wing NGOs of the government, Perkasa and the ISMA. I think that was the occasion, Andrew, if I got it correctly.
He said it's not just the RCD that bastard against liberalism and secularism.
Yeah.
It's almost. What I'm trying to say is that it's almost suggesting that development of a liberal democracy is
antithesis. Yeah.
Well, I think really my interpretation, tell me if I'm wrong, I think really what he's trying to say is, I don't want to be held accountable by sort of certain standards of human rights protection, and so I'm going to dismiss that entire project because I'm operating under a different framework. And so, behind it is sort of a very sinister politics of sort of perpetuating political power, not being held accountable. So he's trying to reject all of that for very narrow agendas. It's very disgusting, and I think one has to be very sort of careful in terms of how you respond, because you don't want to strengthen those political voices. And so that's the challenge of of people who are here in Malaysia, in terms of not falling into the trap that they're trying to set for you, knowing how to read the political landscape in ways that can sort of push things in a positive direction.
Yeah. Getting out of the politics knowledge in Malaysia is that because there was something said about the book where it was alluded that Sharia compliance and things like that should be a private matter rather than a public. But the way I read and see, what's happening in this country is that compliance to Islamic values knowledge is moral policing and all. It becomes a public issue, and even in terms of the bearing of someone who whether he's a Muslim or not Muslim becomes all these things come in, and essentially from the Christian perspective, I'm a Christian. Basically, faith to me and to many of my Christian friends is basically a private matter. Although you go to church, but it's a private matter. Whether you believe, don't believe, whether you go to church today or don't go to church, it's a private matter. the pastor cannot say, hey, you have sinned, kind of thing. You didn't go to church today. Actually, I didn't go to church today. So my question is that, are there examples of different societies or countries where Sharia actually has been more predominantly a private matter rather than a public?
Just to point on that, I mean, it's a private matter for you as a Christian today, but Christians in the West, 200 or 300 years ago, had very similar views to how Muslims believe today. This is a public matter. If you don't go to church, if you sort of have a different interpretation, that's cause for disruption. So, I mean, you're, I think, benefiting from a certain sort of evolution of Christianity on these issues. And unfortunately, the Muslim world is just beginning to debate these issues of religion in the public sphere, what role religion should play in government, and how much it should be enforced or not enforced. But in terms of your specific question, are there other examples? Yeah, I mean, there's an example of Turkey, for example. Unfortunately, the Turkish example doesn't have a lot of resonance for other Muslims because it's believed to still be informed by a deeply secular sort of political experience. But I think the much more interesting example is the one that I talked about yesterday. Is still a new example, and that's the case of Tunisia. Because it's an emerging democracy, they've written a very, I think, they've written a constitution that both secularists and Islamists can look to and say, this reflects our values. And that's actually, I think, the challenge in many ways of how you can bridge polarization in society. If you can come to a constitution where people coming from different backgrounds can say, we can live with this and it reflects our values. The broader problem here is that, at least in the case of the Muslim world, this whole question of Sharia being a private matter is an issue that was never publicly debated and agreed upon by the masses of Muslims. In the case of the Arab world, most of the countries there are authoritarian regimes. When they emerged as new post-colonial states, they had basically ruling military regimes or ruling elites who adopted different forms of sort of westernization programs and policies. They imported a lot of French and English sort of legal codes, and they had that as the dominant sort of system, at least in theory, and they allowed Sharia to still exist in the private realm. But what happened over the course of the 20th century is many of those regimes in the Arab world were corrupt torture states. And people started to reject everything that they stood for, including this whole idea that Sharia should simply be sort of a private realm, and they questioned everything about these westernization and modernization programs. And so this appeal to sort of having Sharia become the national code is basically a reflection of the fact, at least in the Arab world, that the legal system there never worked to begin with. Never sort of administered justice. At least the overtly secular system, and let's say, Syria or Iraq under Saddam, or even in Egypt, never really administered justice. It was a corrupt system that reflected the wishes of the executive. And over the course of time, many politically active Muslims felt that the entire system was corrupt, and they started to look for alternative sort of sources of political community and alternative legal systems. And they said, look, if this is a secular system based on a certain French or British code, and it's not really working for us, it's just reflecting the interests of ruling elites, well, we want a different model. And so they romanticized a certain, I think, Islamic view of things, how if you can simply sort of impose Sharia from above, then that will solve all of society's problems. And so that's, in a nutshell, the background to. But I think the successful models in the Muslim world are, Turkey, in Tunisia, and then the one that I'm not sure why it's not more studied and relevant here in the case of Malaysia is what's happening next door in Indonesia. It seems to be, for all of its shortcomings, to have a system that is functionally secular, although they don't call it secular, but seems to sort of resolve this whole question of what role religion should play in public life. And there's a lot of problems, I realize, in Indonesia, but it seems to be one that's just next door and can have perhaps lessons to teach for this.
They're doing a catch-up game right now, and I think if democracy is to be in place, they will surely progress faster than us. because they've got a huge economy by way of, they have 250 million, almost 10 times of ours. So if democracy is in place in Indonesia, for a better, government that is more accountable and less corruption, less, if not totally free from corruption, I think they will surely zoom past us, and I think there is a commitment in that direction. And they have got good Islamist political organization, parties, but playing it very well. Although they have their own problems. I understand.
But in the case of Indonesia, the founding sort of structure and a consensus exists on what the basic structure of the constitution should be. Everyone sort of accepts it. A party will come in, a party will go out, but the basic constitution, and particularly the idea that there should be equality for all religions, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim. So they seem to have arrived at that consensus. And I guess their political experience has been different. The forces that have intervened in terms of shaping the debate on Islam and politics and law have not been the same forces that have intervened in this country. And so you can only take comparisons so far. I'm not saying you can't reproduce political models, but
okay.
So any other last question?
No. Good.
Okay. Yeah, okay, we are going to adjourn, and I have to apologize, but today our caterer wouldn't be able to make chicken chops as usual. So we're going to have some very traditional Malay food.
Perfect, even better.
Yeah. And thank you for attending this session, and thank you to Dr. Nadir, Dr. Zul. We're very pleased to have you, and to Dr. Nadir, of course, we have one last session after this.
Yes.
Yeah. And thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Sure.
Okay.
And check.